Let's pray, can we? God, you are awesome in this place. Thank you for who you are. Open up our minds and understanding to know who you are, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Should I switch or are we give you okay? Switch? All right. I will be right back. Let's try this. Is this way better? You can only do so much when you talk out of your nose, you know, the nasal voice. Acts chapter 20. The book of Acts chapter 20. Paul is leaving. We spent the last couple weeks on a city called Ephesus. And let me do a quick reminder. Ephesus is going to become the center of Christianity for a couple hundred years. And just an incredible move of God happened. This is one thing you may not know, how influential was what happened at Ephesus. 5 books of the Bible were written from the city of Ephesus. 1 Corinthians, Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. He started the church in Corinth right before he went to Ephesus. And if you've ever read Corinthians, Corinth is a rough church. They got a lot of rough things going on. And Paul sent a letter to correct them. So that happened. Timothy becomes the pastor of Ephesus. And Paul writes 1st and 2nd Timothy to Timothy while he's in Ephesus. And when Timothy leaves, John, the disciple of Jesus, becomes the pastor. He becomes the pastor in his 90s. He starts to pastor the church. So how many of you feel like retiring? Forget it. You know, I got some pastor positions open for you guys. Let's step up and take these over. He starts pastoring in his 90s. He moves there after Patmos. Patmos is where he writes the book of Revelation. And then he moves to Ephesus, and he writes 1st, 2nd, and 3rd epistle of John, and then Big John. Big John, the Big John. I don't know what else to call it. The Big John is the last book of the Bible written. John is the very last book that's written. And so they put that there. Okay? And so what we're going to do now is Paul is going to leave Ephesus and start working his way to Jerusalem. We're going to see what happens there. But Rome, this is one thing we do every once in a while. We pause and see what's happening in the government because it's going to have a huge influence on what happens with the formation of the church. I've got a number of names we're going to put behind me right here that will give you some idea what's happening. Middle 30, the year's 30, okay? The emperor is Caligula. None of the Roman Caesars are that good. But Caligula, it seems to be a little worse than other ones. He tries to make a statue of himself and move it to the temple so the Jewish people will worship him. Now, the Jewish people aren't going to do that, so this is going to be a huge collision between the Jews and Caligula. And they all march out of Jerusalem. They look like an army, but they literally go in front of the Roman army and expose their necks and said, kill us before we allow you to do this. The Roman leader is smart enough not to kill every single Jewish person. And so he takes it back. And Caligula changes his mind, but then he says, I do want a statue there. So he builds another one, ships it, and a storm comes and sinks it. So he starts building a third statue. Okay? But he dies before that one's done. There you go. Anyway, he has a sister. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce her name. Okay? He doesn't like her. He kicks her out of Rome, and she becomes an exile in this little island. She, while she lives there, has a son named Nero. That may be a name you'll know. He's going to become extremely instrumental. Okay? So, Caligula kicks her out. This is what's happening. And then he dies, and a relative of his, Claudius, takes power. Claudius takes power. Claudius goes to her, it would be his cousin, and invites her back. You don't have to be in exile. Move back, bring Nero with you. Okay? The problem is Claudius is married to this woman, Messalina. Messalina is extremely jealous woman, and she doesn't like this person coming, okay? She's jealous of her cousin because evidently her cousin's good looking, and she's jealous of Nero. And so she sends an assassin to kill Nero. And the assassin goes into this boy's room in the night, and there happens to be this huge snake underneath Nero's pillow. And it comes out when the assassin's there, scares the assassin. He flees. The mother hears something going on. She comes in. The snake takes off, but here the snake was shedding, and it has a snake skin, is what the snake was doing. The mother believes the snake saved her son's life, so she takes the skin and makes it into an omelet. Remember we talked about omelets last week? And so she makes an omelet out of the thing, and he wears it the rest of his life. We talked on that last week. Didn't we clear that up? Omelets and amulets and all that? Okay, so he's now wearing the snakeskin omelet. Okay? So, the guy finds out that she tried to murder his cousin. And so what he does, Claudius does, is he wants to divorce his wife. So he goes through a divorce process, and in the divorce process, he finds out she's sleeping with all these senators, and he changes his mind. He said, I'm not going to divorce you. He kills her instead. You know, it's a more merciful thing to do. I don't want you to have the disgrace of being divorced. So he kills her, and he marries his cousin. So this is what's happening in Rome. And there's a reason I'm telling you this, okay? You put this in the back of your mind. We're going to see what's happening. This is what's going on in Rome. Okay, so now we have Claudius and Agrippina, whatever, how you pronounce her name. They're the new couple, and they have a son named Nero. The problem is Claudius has another son. So when a Caesar has two sons, which one of them becomes Caesar when he dies? How many can see a rivalry going on? Okay. Now, Nero's mom is smart enough to realize, I'm not going to let my boy get kicked aside. He's going to be Caesar. So she poisons her husband with mushrooms. Makes him eat poisoned mushrooms. Okay? Seriously, you can't make this up. Nero comes up later on and calls mushrooms the nectar of the gods, the food of the gods, because it made him Caesar. The mushrooms don't kill the guy, it gets him very sick. So they call a doctor. The doctor has a way of making him throw up. They take a feather and tickle the back of the throat to make him throw up so the mushrooms don't kill him. Well, the wife knows this is going to happen, so what she does is she takes the feather and dips it in poison. And when he puts it in his throat and tickles him, the doctor actually poisons the guy and kills him. So now he's dead. And 17-year-old Nero becomes Caesar. Picture that. Think of a junior in high school becoming leader of the United States. Unquestioned leader of the United States. You come at this guy, you got to eat mushrooms. You know, that's what they're going to do. Can you imagine where Rome is headed? 17-year-old is now ruler. This is all going on. This all happens in a 3-year period with her being invited back and marrying him and poisoning him and Nero becoming. This all happens when Paul is in Ephesus. So God's doing this and Rome's doing this. Nero's there, and it's going to be about 6 years. Nero is going to go to war against the Christians. It's going to be about 6 years. But right now he's just a 17-year-old in power wearing an omelet around his neck. Okay? The Bible. Now, what we're going to do tonight, there's a couple random things we're going to go. There's not exactly a thing we're going to put it together. But one thing, I shared a couple of them with you already. We're going to explain, you read Acts, but we're going to bring the other books into it to understand where some of the books of the Bible came from, why he wrote some of the things he did, and where we're headed. And so he decides, this is where it starts, when the uproar was over. Remember, there was this huge riot in Ephesus, And when the uproar is over, Paul says, I think I've wore out my welcome. And he decides to go through Macedonia and Greece. At this time, Macedonia and Greece are two different countries. Okay? So he's winding his way through. Actually is on his way back to Corinth and all those cities. He just wants to visit them. So it says, he sent for the believers and encouraged them and said goodbye and left for Macedonia. And it doesn't say anything right here in verse 1, but 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 12 and 13 literally say that when he got there, he was extremely frustrated he didn't find Titus. Luke doesn't mention Titus. I don't know if those two are colliding and it's a perfect omission or anything, but Paul says, I'm really frustrated. I don't know how Titus is doing. You can imagine how slow news travels in these days, okay? Because Titus is actually pastoring Corinth. He's pastoring Corinth. Paul sent this letter. He goes to the city. I want to know what's happening in Corinth. Titus isn't there. So he's extremely frustrated when he leaves. And so where Paul ends up is in this city called Philippi. How many remember Philippi? Okay, that's where he was thrown in jail and the ground shook. That's where Lydia accepts the Lord. She dealt with purple cloth. And Paul was beat up, and so we have those things in Philippi. He ends up back in Philippi, and he says this in 2 Corinthians 8:2, that the Christians in Philippi are under great affliction. So Paul goes there to encourage them, and the Christians in Philippi are being persecuted. We don't know how they're being persecuted. Paul just says in Corinthians, you guys are under great affliction. So something really bad is happening in Philippi to the church. Okay? Remember, Rome's not bothering the church yet. So who's persecuting them? The Jews. The Jews are causing all the affliction. Okay? They're the ones that are stirring it up. In fact, we know the Gentiles kind of respect Jesus. Why do they respect him? What happened to their tax dollars that built the jail? What happened to their tax dollars that built the jail in Philippi? They got to raise taxes to rebuild a jail. Thing fell apart. The Gentiles at this time are respecting them. So the Jews are persecuting the Christians. Okay? In the midst of this persecution, okay, they are going to receive an offering for Jerusalem. This is Paul's passion. This is what he's about. Okay? Jerusalem is under a famine. They're under a problem. There's not much money flowing out of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is going to be in this eternal depression until they're destroyed. Here's a memory question for you. Way back in Acts chapter 3, the people in Jerusalem didn't have much money. I'm going to see. This is a hard question. What did the Christians do to make sure they all had enough? Anybody remember? It's a huge highlight. They say what the Christians did in Jerusalem. What they do? Sold all their possessions and gave them to each other. They were literally selling their stuff and giving it to each other. The problem now is Paul, before he became a Christian, chased down the Christians, drove all the Christians out of Jerusalem. They're not there anymore. There's very few there. Now there's an economic problem, and nobody there has anything to sell to help them. So they kind of brought this on themselves by driving the Christians out. They're bad. And so Paul's idea is the Jewish Christians don't like the Gentile Christians. Paul's got this ingenious idea. I'm going to ask all the Gentile Christians to take an incredible offering. I'm going to take it with me to Jerusalem and say the Gentiles gave you this money and see if that helped builds a bridge. That's Paul's idea. Okay, sounds like a good idea, huh? So where's the first place he stops to collect money? Philippi. Sounds great, right? The problem is what's happening in Philippi? Persecution. They're being attacked. And look what Paul says. He says, I want you to give it an offering. He explains in Corinthians about this offering. Even though we're reading in Acts, Corinthians explains the trip. Okay? What did he say? In fact, he gave us 3 lessons from it on giving. First off, 2 Corinthians 8:3, Paul says, you guys gave above your ability. So here we have them being persecuted, and they're still able to give. So what Paul's doing here is he's giving us lessons on giving. So giving to God is never based on trying to figure it out in your own reasoning, what I can or can't give. Okay, that's basically what he's saying. It's not based on when you can and can't give. So can you imagine? It's almost like these guys are running for their life. But before I run, here's some money. I got to go. You know, he said, you guys amaze me. You're under incredible persecution, but they gave above their ability. Second thing he says about giving is giving's like growing a seed. He calls it a seed. Giving's a seed. And this is when he's in Philippi. Giving's a seed. Now, what's a seed? This shouldn't be that hard. If I plant 1 corn seed, what do I get back? A stalk. And a stalk has 2 ears on it. And how many kernels are on each ear? Anybody know? Neither do I. I was hoping somebody knew. That just came to me. I wish I would have looked it up. Come on, somebody has a smartphone. How many kernels on a cob? Look it up. Help me out. Help me out. This is ingenious. It just came to me right now. I need someone to look that up. So you plant 1 seed. Wave your hand when you have the answer. I see lots of people type it, and you're acting like you're looking this up for me, but you're just checking the scores. But, you know, at least I'm impressed. How many kernels on a cob of corn? Help me out. Help me out. What? 800. Whoa. And how many ears on a stalk? 2, possibly 3. 2 for sure. Down south. You mean like Kenosha? Are we talking way down south, Rockford? The deep south. Oh, there it is. Oh, man. 100 bushels, 800 corn in 16 rows. Look at that. 1 seed. This is what Paul says about it, why he calls it a seed. You plant 1 seed in, what's your harvest? 1,600. That's what Paul said. That's the thing about giving. You can't outgive God. If you plant, God promises a harvest. Now, guys, how many know this is taken way off? Some people, it's not to live, you know, a life of luxury per se. It's to advance the kingdom. But God literally says, test me on this. There's so many people that don't give. I only have this much. And God says, man, if you don't do it, you got to give. Okay? I do know this. This stat I do know. Go back to that stat. Okay? 16 rows, 100 bushels. We did that here. This one I know. 7,280,000 kernels. 106 kernels will help you make an acre. I remember holding them up once in a little baggie. 106 kernels. How much would you lose if you ate 50 of those yourself? You go from 7,280,000 to 3,600,000. See, the more we consume, the less we have to give. And God says, man, this is the thing about giving. Not only do we not try to measure in our own mind what we can afford, but we walk into this and say, God, it's a seed. I plant it. I'm trusting you to take care of me. Okay? And the third thing he teaches us about it, it's a cause for great joy. Now that's amazing. Paul says, you guys are very joyful because you're able to give. Now put this in perspective. What's happening in Philippi to the believers there? Incredible persecution. And Paul says, but they were really excited about the opportunity to give to the Jews. Is that not insane? You guys had great joy. And who are they given to? People that don't like them. The Gentiles. You know, the Jews don't care for them. So just some lessons there from Philippi that he's sharing. Okay? So they're there. He's collecting money. 2 Corinthians 7 talks about that. That when he's there, they're collecting money. it says this, but God who encourages us, who are discouraged, encouraged us by the arrival of Titus. When he first went there, he was really, oh, what's happening? Titus shows up. And what Titus is doing, people, is if you read 1 Corinthians, Paul is dealing with a lot of garbage. Lawsuits in the church. We got a guy sleeping with his dad's wife. And everybody thinks, wow, it's awesome. They're having communion. And while they're having communion, literal fist fights break out. And they start punching each other. We end with communion every week. Can you imagine us inviting everybody up and you're standing there and back off, man. You back off. And a fist fight breaks out. And I'm like, wow, this is really good. And that's what's happening in Corinth. And then he talks about spiritual gifts. And what they're using as spiritual gifts, they're starting to yell louder than each other. Rather than have somebody come up and give a prophecy, somebody's speaking, and then somebody interrupts them, and they speak louder and louder. These are the problems Paul's dealing with. And then some of them say, I don't even like Paul anymore. I'm going after Apollos. And so he writes this letter, and he's waiting for Titus. He goes, what's happening? Titus shows up, says this incredible report. Corinth is a total different church. So Paul writes 2 Corinthians. And says, wow, I'm excited. So Paul is finally great. They're no longer punching each other during communion. What a huge win. You know, Paul's excited. And so he says, I'm really excited for this to happen. In fact, 2 Corinthians even hints to, between 1st and 2 Corinthians, Paul stopped there and screamed at them all. They didn't like it, and he left. 2 Corinthians hints to, when I visited you, it didn't go well. I want to come back and make it right. So he's going back for a third visit. And so Titus, if we can get that, Titus shows up and he reports, man, Corinth is doing well. So what Paul does is he writes a second letter and sends it to them. And when he sends it to them, Timothy and Titus go together. They go back to Corinth. Paul's still in Philippi, and he sends Timothy and Titus back to Corinth to straighten it out. All right? Covered a lot right off the bat. Does that make sense? Any questions? Any comments about that? So Paul's in Philippi. He's starting to collect money for Jerusalem. Titus shows up. He feels relieved. Philippi's still doing persecution. But, boy, they got to be encouraged because who's gotten persecuted more than anybody? Paul. I mean, they stoned him until he was dead. He goes, you guys can make it, man. I made it. You guys can make it. So he's encouraging everybody. Okay? You can imagine what that's like for him. One other thing he does is he writes a letter to Rome. When Nero takes over, I shared this weeks ago. Claudius kicks out all the Jews. Nero takes over and says, Jews can come back. And so Priscilla, Aquila, they all start moving back to Rome. They all start moving back, okay? And Paul has this passion to visit Rome, and so he writes the letter Romans. And he gives it to a person called Phoebe. Phoebe. Who is Phoebe? What's the Bible say she is? A deacon. Okay? The word for deacon there, Paul literally uses the same word when he says receive Timothy, receive Titus, receive Phoebe. It's the same level. Paul had elevated Phoebe. In the area, another word to use is like she's my diplomat, and she's coming to you. There's a huge issue with that. What is Phoebe? She is a she. How many can see where that could be an issue? Isn't that amazing? It wasn't an issue back then, but we make it a big issue today. It wasn't an issue for Paul. He's literally giving the book of Romans to Phoebe and says, take this up there. And then he writes in the letter, and when Phoebe reads it, she's reading it like I'm reading it to you. Listen to Phoebe as she talks to you. So who is Phoebe? A deacon who's teaching for Paul to the Roman Christians. Isn't that incredible? And now today we have so many churches that say, man, I can't even believe you're allowing a woman to say something. They got to shut up. Where Paul says, man, I'm sending her, and she's going to read Romans to you. And remember, it's not just reading. What do? They memorize it. Stay with Phoebe, and she'll make sure you memorize Romans. Okay, how'd you like that? That's it. Why memorize Romans? Remember, the literary rate is only 10%. So there's no way you're going to be able to read this thing. If you don't memorize it, you'll never know it. So they go and memorize all this, okay? So Paul sends her, all right? And basically Romans is Galatians in more detail. What's Galatians? Why the Gentiles can be believers. Romans is why the Gentiles can be believers. Something extremely interesting in the book of Romans, though. Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13. Okay? In fact, I didn't put it in my notes. Can we look at Romans 13:1? Can you bring that up, guys? You'll see why I'm bringing this up and why I shared that story just a little bit ago. Romans 13:1. What does it say? I did put it up. I didn't think I did. What does that say? Help me out. You can talk. Subject yourselves to who? The governing authorities. Because why? There's no authority and power except by who? God. Wait a second. Didn't you just say this guy's poisoning each other with poison mushrooms and poison feathers, tickling the back of the throats and murdering each other and marrying my cousin and then wearing omelets of snakeskin and all that stuff? Okay? Paul knows this stuff's going on, and yet what does he write in Romans? Not one of them are in leadership unless God shares his authority with them. How many think that's crazy? How many think we could probably use that in the church today when it comes to leaders over us? The only reason. Now, I'm not saying every leader comes to bless a nation. Sometimes God uses leaders to punish a nation. They're not all good. Rome doesn't have Caesars to bless them. These guys are horrible, and they're a noose around Rome's neck. Okay? They're going to destroy the country, the empire soon. But Paul puts this in Romans. There's not one leader that God doesn't allow to share his authority. How do we know that? God is over all authority, so nobody can have any authority unless he shares it with them anyway. The only authority anybody has is because he doles it out. Okay? Does that make sense? I don't know if there'll be a comment over that one or a question or anything. That's why I shared all that's happening in Rome, because it's interesting. They know that's happening in Rome, and then Paul says, God's still over every Caesar. It's not random, because people in Rome would go, man, what's going on? I've got a plan. Any questions? Oh, you guys are really getting this or could care less. So, all right, we'll keep going. Chapter 20 of Acts. He left Ephesus because a huge riot. He's in Macedonia. What is he doing in Macedonia? It's just one verse in Acts, but he doesn't see Titus. Titus comes to him. He collects an offering. Okay? He's doing that. And then it says he takes off. While there, he encouraged the believers in all the towns he passed through. Then he traveled down to Greece, where he stayed for 3 months. He was preparing to sail back for Syria when he discovered a plot by some of the Jews against his life, so he decided to return through Macedonia. How did the Jews try to kill Paul earlier? They chased him down. They threw stones at him. They killed him in that way. In fact, they killed him once, and he's still alive. Now he discovers that this time it's an assassination plot that God exposes. Okay, so this time they're getting more crafty. Let's just assassinate him. That doesn't work either. Paul discovers it, and so he takes off again. Paul is spending most of his life running for his life. In fact, after this chapter, after chapter 21, Paul, the rest of Acts is going to be Paul not able to minister to people. Paul is going to have to use all his energy just to stay alive. He's fighting everybody around him. Okay? So his ministry days are getting narrower, but he's just going to focus to stay alive. But he gives us some more books of the Bible during it, so that's not bad. So he's running with people, and then it says several men were traveling with him, and it gives a list of everybody that was traveling with him. All right? Why is that so important? Help me out. We don't know why they traveled with him. Why would you think? What would be some reasons he'd take this huge entourage with him now? What's that? Protection. These guys are trying to kill him. These guys are going to stay up overnight. Some guy's going to stay up and watch him each night. Okay? He's got an entourage that's going with him to protect him. But there may be another reason. What would be another reason he'd have this huge entourage? They could take his word back to his people. That's good. Spread it out. Yeah. What's that? Oh, yeah, these are definitely his disciples. These are his people. What did he collect in Philippi? What is he carrying with him? A wad of gold, coins. He is carrying enough to feed Jerusalem through a drought. There's no banks per se to put it in a bank and drop it. You carry bags of this stuff. So the entourage is going with him for all the reasons you said, but I believe number one is probably to protect him. Number two is they are carrying a bunch of money. And how many know there's good accountability when there's a couple people? Should we take some out? I don't know. When there's a big group, it's harder to do that. Okay? It's integrity. It's integrity. This mass mob is moving with this money, and they want to take it there. Okay? The problem here, verse 5, it says, they went on ahead and waited for us at Troas. After the Passover ended, we boarded a ship in Philippi and Macedonia. 5 days later, joined them in Troas, where we stayed a week. Okay? He wanted to get to Jerusalem by Passover. A guy tried to kill him. He decided to hang out for 3 months. I'm not going. You know, I'm not going to let him know, because everybody knows he was going to Jerusalem. So he decided to wait for 3 months. So if a guy's sitting on the side of the road to kill him in Jerusalem, how long are they going to sit there? Paul's just sitting still for 3 months. I'm not going. So any assassination plot along the path will fall apart. We don't even know where Paul is. I got bad intel. He's not coming this way. And they don't show up. And so he has to have Passover in Philippi. Interesting thing about that, Philippi is the only city he went to that didn't have a synagogue. And that's where he has Passover. So he's literally having Passover with Gentiles. He may be just explaining what Passover means. But Philippi is where he has Passover, and Passover is the one area that doesn't have a synagogue. There's very few Jews, but he still celebrates it with them. And one other thing, I highlighted it. Who joins them once again in Philippi? It went from they to we. Who's the we? Who knows? I'm asking a lot of memory. I know it's the end of summer, and we're in summer mode, and if we were just on a lake talking, it would be so much better. But who is it? Who joined you? Who wrote Acts? Luke. Luke was with them. Luke stayed in Philippi. Paul's back in Philippi. Luke joins them. They came, we left. Philippi. So Luke is leaving Philippi. And we have a theory why he stayed in Philippi. Anybody remember that incredible romantic theory? He married Lydia. And so they've been married about 5 years, and Luke said, I'm going on a mission trip. I'm out of here. I don't know. It's just, what do you do? It's just the Bible, people. You can't do much with it. They take off. What's that? Yeah. That was horrible to bring that up. Nobody could hear that. I'll have to tell the story now. We got married on a Saturday. The following Saturday, I spoke at a festival. So we had to come back so I could speak at this festival. When we were speaking at this festival, a guy named Gary Wilkerson was there speaking at it. And we talked because we were fellow speakers. I spoke at 8 in the morning, and he spoke at 7 at night, where all the people were there. I spoke to like 12 people. He was there to a couple thousand. And I go, yeah, a speaker's got to hang out, Gary. Yeah. Gary invited me to Detroit. At that time, it was an inner city Detroit church. He said, would you help us start this church? They just started it. It was an old building. He had 2 other guys with him. And their strategy was, he said, I'm going to pray for this building. You witness this way. You witness this way. So we just went there. And so we were married a month, and I went away a week to minister in inner city Detroit. So I understand Luke. You know, it's just boom, we went. I went to Detroit and ministered. Nothing like a kid from Wausau. Really fits well into inner city Detroit. I was in my element. It was awesome. I got to tell you one story. Sorry, rabbit trail. Got to tell you one story. The speaker, this is just for older people. The singers were second chapter of Acts, and the speaker was Nikki Cruz. Okay, so what we did is we set this stage up for second chapter of Acts every day. Then we went door to door and invited people. Second chapter of Acts played. Nikki Cruz spoke. We tore down the stage when they prayed, put it on a truck. Next day we did it again. Prayed. That's what I did for a week, okay? And so the first night we're setting up in this park. The policeman comes up to me and goes, what are you setting up here for? Are you the leader? And I looked around. I was the only white guy. I go, no, I don't know what's going on. And he said, obviously you don't. There were 3 murders in this park yesterday. I wouldn't even set up here. I can't believe you're setting up. And I go to somebody smarter than me and go, I don't think we should be here. He goes, oh, yeah, God's here. We're good. And so he talks to the police. He goes, well, as long as you're out of here by dark. Okay, Nikki Cruz doesn't come. Nikki Cruz doesn't come. He doesn't come. He doesn't come. He doesn't come. Second chapter of Acts does it. Gary Wilkerson preaches. See some people come to the Lord. An awesome day. We're ready to tear down. Nikki gets there. His plane was delayed. He just landed in Detroit. And he said, no, we can't tear down. God gave me a message. I got to preach, got to preach. This is a kid from Wausau, and it's getting dark. And I'm like, I think the police said be out of here by dark. And I'm from Wausau, and I believe I know much better than you people that live here all the time what we possibly should do. And Nikki said, man, I'm going to preach. He preached. I don't remember what happened. Blah, blah, blah. I don't remember what he shared. This is what I do remember. This guy was crying. He did something called the altar call. These people come forward, and we're praying. This guy's crying. I go up to pray with him. I just put my arm around him. He turns around to punch me. He goes, oh, never mind. And I'm like, wow, what's happening? He goes, what is going on here? And I'm like, well, this guy's preaching and stuff. He goes, preaching? I don't know. Here's what happened. He said, I missed the whole thing. I was walking through the park, and he said, I was tapped on the shoulder. I turned around. Nobody was there. He said, my shirt was grabbed. I was dragged to the front. And the closer I got to the front, every bad thing I've ever done in my life came up, and I'm just feeling weepy, and I feel gross. What's wrong? What's going on here? I introduced him to Nikki. An incredible salvation experience. How many know I'm glad we stayed in that park? It was for that guy alone. Isn't that awesome? Guy can do anything, can't he? He can do anything. So it was a great trip. So there we are. Luke joins them. They're ready to go. Look what happens. They take off. They're still on their way to Jerusalem. Just one more point to bring up here. They stayed a week. On the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share the Lord's Supper. What is unique about that? What is unique about that? When would the synagogue been meeting? When do the Jews meet? Saturday. What is the first instance we have of what's happening? What's starting to happen? Sunday. They're starting to meet on Sunday. Why would they move? Help me out. Why would they move to Sunday from Saturday? Resurrection. Celebrate the resurrection. And they're starting to meet. It says the Lord's Supper. I don't believe that is exactly the Lord's Supper like we're going to celebrate in a few minutes. It's not the same thing. What they do is breaking bread. It will develop within the next few years. By the year 100, they are doing the Lord's Supper like we do. But this is still the year 54. They're not doing it. What they do is breaking bread. This is an important thing that Jesus did with Judas. The disciples, Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me. And all the disciples said, is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And Jesus said, whoever I dip bread with. What is dipping bread? That's breaking bread. What they did in the church is they would go up to a loaf. I'm just going to come to my wife here. They would take a loaf and they would break it and give it to each other. And not just to give it, but they would look in each other's eyes and said, is there anything between us that we need to talk about? So breaking bread is literally making sure there's nothing between us. And so when the Bible says breaking bread, it's probably not communion like we did. It's this breaking. He's making sure there's nothing between him and any of them. That's why the Bible says Satan entered Judas at that time, because Jesus gave him the bread. Is there anything between us? And what did Judas? He just ate it. No, we're good. And the Bible said the devil came in him at that time. And Jesus said, why don't you go out and do what you're supposed to do? And he goes, all right. So Judas literally looked at Jesus and said, no, we're good. There's nothing between us. And as soon as that lie, the devil came into him. And so when it says the Lord's Supper, it's probably closer to that than it is what we do. Okay? And then it says he was preaching to them. He was talking the next day and kept talking till midnight. You go, man, what a sermon. Let me give you this theory. They're meeting the first day of the week, which was what? Sunday. Here's the thing. Let's see how well you remember. At what time in Jewish culture did Sunday start? 6 o'clock Saturday night. 6 o'clock Saturday night. So when it says he preached well after midnight, he probably didn't start preaching Sunday morning and preach till midnight. Most likely, this is a Saturday night, what we would call a Saturday night meeting. But they call it Sunday. Okay, it's a Saturday night meeting. Sometime after 6, he's preaching till midnight. So don't think he started at 9 in the morning, preached till midnight. He's probably preaching Saturday night because he's leaving the next day. But they call it Sunday already. Why do they do that? Does that seem kind of, how many think that's stupid? Because we're Americans and the way we do everything in the world's better. Right? I mean, why do you drive on the left side of the road? England, you're worthless. Okay? Everything we do is better. Why do they do that? There's a theory behind it. I'm going with it because in America, our days start with dark, midnight, it's dark, and then the sun comes up, and then how does the day end? Dark again. So it's like, oh, my life stinks. Hey, it's great, but it's only going to last so long. Ugh. Jews start their days at 6 at night because the Bible says darkness may remain for a night, but the day is always going to end with light. There's light coming and no more darkness. Isn't that cool? How many know America may not have the best thing in that way? Okay? That's why they do that. They want darkness to end and the day to always end with the light. Something good happening. But what happened here? He kept talking till midnight. And we do know Paul was a monotone speaker. And so he kept preaching. And then what happened? As Paul spoke, I love verse 9. On and on. How many are getting there? I know. How many know? I know that feeling. I know that feeling. Rabbit trail after rabbit trail. Come on, just end the thing. We're dead. This is why we have chairs and we don't allow you to sit on the windowsills. A young man fell asleep and fell out the window. Okay, let that be a lesson. Okay, you just don't fall. At least don't sit on the windowsills. He fell asleep, fell out the windowsill, and he's dead. Okay? He fell to, look at the Bible specifically says, 3 stories fell to his death below. I love Paul. He went down and says, don't worry, he's alive. What a guy. The guy falls asleep during his sermon, dies. Paul grabs him and says, don't worry, he's alive. The wording there, the sense, we don't know exactly what happened, but the Bible says in the Old Testament, Elijah literally laid on a guy and he came back to life. They think this is what Paul may have done. He just laid on him, picked him up and said, he's good. Can you imagine that? Then they all went upstairs. Check this out. They all went upstairs, shared the Lord's Supper, broke bread again. This is a different group, broke bread. And look at this. Paul continued talking to them until dawn. Now, if that's me, if somebody dies and they come back to life, church is over. Wow, was that cool? How many think church is over? What did Paul do? He continued preaching. In the times of Acts, miracles happen. Now, somebody coming back to life, that has got to be the ultimate miracle. We talked last week about aprons healing people, someone coming back to life. But they realized something that the church in America has got to realize. It's not the miracles or anything that changes lives. It's the teaching. And Paul said, the most important thing I can do is teach you guys. Hey, that's awesome, but let me teach you guys. And John Cooper, right? John Cooper, he's from Skillet. He came out with an incredible article. It's being shared all over Facebook. If you haven't find it. And he's talking about the problem in the church today is we're relying on too many experiences instead of the Word of God. And people that are living their whole Christian life on experience, suddenly the experiences aren't happening, and they're standing in front of huge crowds that follow them and saying, I don't even believe in Jesus anymore. Because it's just getting rougher than it should. People were not promised easy lives. We're promised rough. And John Cooper came out with this huge article. We got to get back to the Word of God. It's the most important. Interview him. Did you see heaven? What was it like? Was there a bright light? He goes back to teaching. Because the only thing that's going to carry you guys is the teaching. You can only live so long on a guy coming back to life. I got to teach you the Word of God. And that's why we need this today. And that's why on Wednesday nights, we've done this forever. I preach topics Sunday morning. But Wednesday night, we go verse by verse by verse. We've always done that on Wednesday nights. You know, just because we need this, don't we? God, just give us the Word of the Bible again. I can't miss it week after week. God, help me, just to read this thing. So that's the way we're going to pray tonight. Any questions before we go into time of vocal worship about that? Yeah. I'm going to come back. We're going to use this microphone.
So if they were just having a meal and breaking bread, why does it say the Lord's Supper? And up there it was like in capital letters, the Lord's Supper.
Because it's our best interpretation of what we were doing from me studying Judaism. And there's this book called the Didache that was written in the years 100. And right then, it tells them how to take communion like we do. But most scholars don't believe communion was a standalone thing yet at this time. Paul, and the reason they base that is Paul says in 1 Corinthians, when he talks about the Lord's communion, the Lord's Supper, he talks it in the sense of a love feast, that they made communion as part of a meal. And so when it says they broke bread, some authors just put Lord's Supper, but the more we study it now, more people believe it wasn't the Lord's Supper. It was probably this love feast that they were eating. And that's what would cause the fights. And so they'd have a huge meal. Because when Jesus did communion, it was part of the Passover meal. So they just ate a meal and had it as part of a meal. By the year 100 to 120, it was a standalone thing. Because we don't do that every Wednesday night or Sunday morning and have a whole meal every Wednesday or Sunday. We just have that one piece. So within 40 years, it's going to become a standalone thing. Most scholars just don't believe it happened yet. Okay? They put the Lord's Supper because it could be that, but most scholars are thinking, I don't know if it was a standalone thing yet. But we do know they did the thing breaking bread. That we know they've done for hundreds of years. So that possibly is what they were doing. is breaking bread? We don't know, but I lean more toward the breaking bread. Great question. Any other questions? So what are we going to pray? God, we want to see the miracles, but God, help us understand the Bible too. God, we got to have power and truth. How many know? We aren't going to survive as a church on just truth either. God, we need the power gifts to turn people's lives. Okay? We need incredible things to happen. So God, just do that. Give us a hunger. Give us a hunger. God, that we want to see that happen. Go ahead, team.